Tim's new book. So I'm Tina Govan, and I'm with Placemaking US, and I'm joined by Ryan Smolar and Madeline Spencer, who's somewhere in there, both leaders in the Placemaking US network. And I'm a huge fan of Tim Gill's ever since I first saw him speak a couple decades ago, I think here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so it's been wonderful to reconnect with him via this amazing new book that he's written. We're going to start out with the conversation with a video. So Tim and I spoke actually just recently and recorded a conversation that's been edited and illustrated with photos to highlight some of the key points of his book. And then we're going to join back here for a Q&A session. So you can type your questions into the chat the whole time, or you can ask Tim directly your questions when we meet back here after this short presentation of about 30 minutes. So I think we're ready to roll. Ryan, if you take it away, we'll start this screening of this conversation. You can make it full screen.
I'm Tina Govan, an architect here in Raleigh, North Carolina with Placemaking Studio, and I'm here with Tim Gill, who recently wrote the book Urban Playground: How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities.
To quote Enrique Peñalosa, a city that works well for children is a city that works well for all. That kids really are an indicator species for cities. Central to my book is the idea that what makes a neighborhood child friendly is that children have a lot of everyday freedom. So and I break that down into two dimensions really, that on the one hand there's lots of things for kids to do. There's lots of spaces they can go, they can meet their friends, there are facilities and activities, so lots of choice. But also children have good mobility. They're able to get to these different spaces easily, crucially, of course, on foot or by bike, because it's that independent mobility that I think is such a good indicator of how well a neighborhood works for kids. With the challenge of addressing the climate crisis kind of hanging over our heads as we emerge from the pandemic as well, of course, lots of fundamental questions about what cities should be like, the direction they should be going in. They're all up in the air right now. And so the message of my book is that having a children's lens really helps to ground conversations and moral discussions, ethical discussions about, who has a claim on making cities better, and what about, the long-term future of cities, not just the decisions about 2-4 years ahead, but 2 or 4 generations ahead. How do we build a collective sense of what makes a good city and get beyond kind of individual and narrow vested interests? I think that's why talking about children has a particular power, because it has that ability to get the adults to think more long term and to think in a more collective and kind of positive way about the future of cities.
That's very right on. I mean, I think that's just, it's so true, because you can really bridge divides and bring people together when they start thinking about their children. And as you know, America is very divided today. And so when you get that lens on it, I think it's a great kind of tactic really to bring people together and to think long term, because everyone cares about their kids.
Elke de Crooijer, who's the deputy mayor of Ghent in Belgium, was really clear that for her as a member of the Green Party, that talking about children was a way to help, firm up, to build consensus around a more sustainable city.
Right.
I spoke to some, a civil servant from Norway who's researching planning in Norwegian cities, who was also saying that, and she talked about how bringing in children sweetens the pill for everyone, and means that people are more amenable to accepting, that maybe they can't park their car right outside their house, or maybe the speed limits need to be slower in neighborhoods than they are right now, and because children will benefit. And also everybody, I think, cares about what their city's going to be like in the future, and that if you can shift the conversation away from people's immediate short-term, how am I going to get to work tomorrow morning, to what do I want my city to be like in 5, 10, 15 years, maybe when my kids are growing up, or even bringing up children of their own, then you can see the power, I think, of this idea.
No, I totally agree. And it's a way to broaden your perspective. So you're not thinking so centrally about yourself. Climate change is demanding that of us, but people often don't want to think about it. But if you think about your kids, you're kind of forced in that direction. I mean, also a childhood is something everyone has. So we all share.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that I do, and I think you probably heard me, is in my talks, I often get people to reflect on their own childhoods. The adults, people who maybe, anyone over the age of about 30, I think will have very powerful memories of what I call everyday freedoms, of roaming a neighborhood, of, kind of playing out until the street lights come on and all of that. And, I don't think it's mere nostalgia to remind people of those memories and of the richness and the value of those experiences.
Exactly. I've noticed that, when we have events downtown or anywhere where children are involved, you can see the ripple effect. They bring in their friends and their families and all these other relationships downtown, which you wouldn't normally see. And so I think they're a connector, a bringer together of communities that's not tapped or realized.
Yeah, and you can see that even in more neighborhood contexts. I mean, there's a nice study that that the English architect Dinah Bornat did, where she and some colleagues observed some just ordinary housing estates in suburban estates in England, and just watched where people spent time out of doors. And they found that the places where children were out of doors and playing were also the places where more adults were out of doors and chatting and socializing. So she talked about, children being the kind of the drivers of community life. And I think that's a powerful reminder as well of the way that children can be this sort of catalyst for positive change and a kind of symbol of the health of a community.
And a magnet to bring people, I think like older people like to come see children do things that they can't do anymore, or they just, it's like street performance when you have children out doing something. So I think they really can be activators of public space. The lack of public space has always been a challenge here. And I wondered if you had any, insights on how to tackle that.
Yeah, actually, you've just reminded me that we've all around the world just gone through a kind of, various forms of lockdown. But actually, if you look at childhood over the last 30 years or so, it's been a kind of progressively more severe lockdown over that period that has unfolded for children around the world. In my book, I talk a lot about neighborhoods, because children don't really live in cities. They live in a neighborhood. Where in these neighborhoods can children play? Can they meet their friends? Can they play sport? Can they have experience in nature? Because if sometimes it's actually the transport, it's the mobility that's the key. Because if you can make it easier for kids to walk around and cycle, they can go further, they can explore more, they can find, or get to existing parks, or maybe find natural places, creeks or whatever. There's an awful lot of underused public space, and crucially also just street space that's most of the day doing nothing for nobody. And if you can link some of the transport planning with maybe some of these ideas of reclaiming streets, we call them play streets, you know,
Right.
where they're the community organized, short-term road closures, effectively, you know, groups of parents or residents just spending a couple of hours once a week managing the traffic so that kids can come out and play. That's a really powerful and actually comparatively low cost, very low tech, you know, low barriers to entry way to start reconfiguring the space in the neighborhoods where people live. It's Alice Ferguson at Playing Out is a great example. You know, she started 10, 11 years ago in the city of Bristol with a couple of residents saying, we want our kids to play out more. There's no parks nearby, and you know, our street's pretty empty most of the day anyway. Why can't we just manage the traffic for a bit, and then the kids can just all come out and spill out and play in our street with you know, almost zero cost and very minimal effort. So she's built up that model, which to the degree that it's now, you know, there are 1,000 plans for 1,000 play streets in Australia. There are projects, I'm sure, in the USA. I know there are pilots underway in Canada. It feels like the idea, this vision of children being more active and playful and visible in the public realm, in public space, is an idea whose time has come.
Right. I think you advocate in your book that there should be ideally some sort of child-friendly champion within the government. Like if you have a partner.
You're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that motivated me to write the book and to structure it the way I did, so it's quite strongly structured around specific cities and what they did. And so I was really keen to find out, okay, let's take a dozen or so cities that have tried to go to scale on this. And the best example is Rotterdam, that's actually spent, you know, the equivalent of millions of dollars over the last 12 years or so, and has done, you know, great neighborhood-wide interventions, tackling pavements, traffic, schoolyards, community gardens, playgrounds, and has evaluated and shown that it's made a difference. And that cities like Rotterdam, it seemed to me the key bit, the key ingredient that made them do what they could do and have the impact they did was an official, actually not necessarily a politician, but an official, maybe within parks or planning or even highways, but who was a hub, you know, acted as the kind of central energy point, organizing point, implementation point for programs that were running across different domains of the municipality that were also involving communities. And I saw that in, you know, in Ghent, I saw it in Rotterdam, I saw it in Oslo, where it had a particular focus on transport. Time and again, yeah, you could secure, it may start with just even being a part of somebody's time, and the right person, you know, who's got that energy and that vision and that commitment to children, and is able to be effective at sitting around the table with the highways people and the parks people and the planning people. That was what really made a difference.
So when we went to Turkey one time, we went out to dinner, and there was a field next door to these dining tables that were outside, and there was a pickup soccer game, and my kids were in elementary school, and they invited them from our table to come play with them, and they connected with these kids playing outside while we ate dinner. And then the next day we saw them at the farmer's market, and they were high-fiving, and there was like this connection to the place. And, you know, then there's other times that we've gone to, you know, when we were in Greece, you know, at a plaza, we're out eating, and there's kids on scooters and playing kickball. And there's this mix of all ages and families out together at night, you know, even out till midnight. And there's this sort of relaxed attitude that, yeah, there's adults eating dinner and drinking, and then there's kids playing just right against each other, just that juxtaposition, and there's no uptightness about it.
One of the things that I've learned from traveling all around the world is, you know, the places where people seem to get it right, communities, cultures, nations, are the places where there's just a more relaxed, welcoming mindset around public space. you know, that public space is just basically seen as a good thing that, as you say, families enjoy, when, you know, spontaneous interactions can happen. And so how do we create those opportunities? And I think this comes to one of the big challenges that we face in North America and in Europe and in the UK as part of that, is getting a better balance between the needs of the car and the needs of everybody else. Because
Right.
I think, you know, we've had decades, we've had 100 years or more of basically car-centric planning, and that then sets the framework for a quite, you know, particular type of neighborhood, a neighborhood where you don't see people out and about very much, where, you know, it's a long way to go to the store or to the school, and where if you do see somebody on foot, you think they might be a little bit crazy because why haven't they got a car? So unwinding that and trying to go in a different direction, I think, is a major part of our challenge. And that's why in my book, I mean, you were talking about Copenhagen and Greece and Turkey. I hold up the example of Vauban. Vauban is an eco-suburb in Freiburg in Germany.
Right.
So it's a master planned community of about 5,500 people, as being a kind of lighthouse, you know, as giving us a sense of direction, because it's a wonderfully child-friendly place, and it's, to all intents and purposes, car-free. So you can own a car if you live in Vauban, but if you do, you have to park it in one of a couple of big, you know, parking lots on the edge of the district. And so the whole of the space between the apartments, and we're talking about apartment living, the whole of that space is available for public use, for play, for socializing, for walking, cycling, you know, for growing vegetables, farmers markets, you name it. And it's only when you see a place that's got a radically different, you know, emphasis, where the emphasis isn't on driving your car right up to your house and parking in a big space, and having wide, you know, roads that 95% of the time are not used at all, but instead an emphasis on immediate access to social public life, to greenery, to kids of different ages, grandparents. So when you see that, you realize, oh, actually, you know, the world can be made, can be configured in a different way.
Right. Yeah, that makes, I mean, I think that's a really effective tactic, is sort of showing these successful cities and the benefits they've reaped from putting this child-friendly layer on them.
And there's a diagram in my book, a kind of idealized version of what I call the ultimate child-friendly neighborhood. And it really shows how these different design features of both the space, the green space, the streets, and the buildings as well, and how the buildings, you know, it's kind of basic urban design really, how that all comes together to create a neighborhood, and that, oh yeah, that would be a great place to bring up a kid, because, you know, I would know that they could have the freedom of the neighborhood, that there'd be lots of friends around, that it's never too far away to get to the shops, you know, that they're safe on their bikes, they can play on their skateboards, all of those things. Something that gives us a sense of the direction we should be going in with planning and design.
Right. I mean, all these things are going to be taking shifts of mindsets and trying to get people to let go of their fears and see new possibility.
If we can see children as, if you like, embodying, you know, a more equitable society, and just as you were saying, you know, kids play with other kids, click with other kids, you know, even if they don't have the same language or if they look different, and that should be a source of inspiration as well.
They don't have the hang-ups we have. So
yeah, well, that's almost a quote from the mayor of Tirana, right? So
yeah.
One of my case study cities is Tirana, which is the capital city of Albania. Albania is a fascinating country, and the most despotic communist regime until it collapsed in the early 90s, and then was replaced by an gangster capitalism of the worst kind for 5 or 10 years, nearly led to civil war. So that country is incredibly divided, and Erion Beliage, who's the mayor, has landed on children, actually initially by chance, but he's discovered that the best way to kind of elevate the conversation and offer a new symbol for the future of that city is to talk about children. And he says, you know, children don't have hang-ups, they don't have agendas, you know, their minds are less closed down. And so, you know, they can help us find a way forward that we can share and, you know, and kind of and coalesce around. Really interesting. They realized that in this city that was, you know, poorly planned, a lot of illegal building going on, cars everywhere, and a distrust of authority, that putting in neighborhood playgrounds was just really valued by local people, not just children, not just parents, but grandparents as well, because in that culture, grandparents have a really important role. And
Wow.
so these playgrounds that they were creating were becoming community melting pots and watering holes that were really helping to lift the spirit in those neighborhoods, but also helping to build levels of trust and confidence in the municipality that actually was interested in making a difference to people's everyday lives.
Also, this idea of affordances, this idea that you don't over-prescribe, and
Yeah.
and again, children are the ones that sort of break boundaries and use things in ways that aren't dictated to them, and animate places in ways that adults would be fearful of doing. And so I love that idea of sort of providing prompts,
Mm-hmm.
and then allowing for, you know, life, like kids to come in and interpret it in different ways. And I think
Yeah.
it's a lesson that we can learn in all kinds of spaces, you know, because in traditionally it's been, you know, play here, and then there's been a fence around it, about, you know, the
Sure.
idea of freedom of
Yeah.
play and exploring.
Yeah. Yeah. So at its simplest, an affordance, it's a really simple idea. It's an object or a feature of the environment that makes an offer or an invitation to a person. Thinking in terms of affordances or offers is really good in terms of play, because it wakes us up to how receptive kids are to features in the environment. I mean, again, a low wall is great for balancing, right? I mean, who hasn't walked along, you know, with their kid holding hands, and then the kid just leaps up and walks along a wall because it's there, and it's kind of it's like inviting the child to play on it. And
Right.
so I think some of the best playground designers are people who are very alive to all sorts of affordances that don't depend on manufactured factory built equipment, you know, to slopes, ditches, hillocks, you know, bridges, or even better, you know, loose materials, stuff that kids can make stuff with. Sand and water. Sand and water has incredible play potential because the affordances in terms of construction and destruction are almost limitless. So yeah, affordances is a really neat concept for getting people away from the idea that play equals manufactured kit in a playground. And you only have to watch a child for 15 seconds to realize that they're kind of, you know, will play on almost anything. I guess the basic message is, if we want to make neighborhoods more playful, then let's think about that basic play force, you know, the vital force of play in children, and not, you know, and not just cut straight to the equipped playground. We may not need playgrounds at all. And let's remind ourselves that, you know, 150 years ago, playgrounds didn't exist. They were invented as a way of kind of creating space for kids to play that were not in the street. Actually, that was their main, you know, the history of the playground. And so for tens of millennia, you know, human beings grew up healthy and playful and creative without having any playgrounds. So let's see if we can update this model. Sometime in my book, I talk about almost taking the idea of a playful place and kind of taking down the fences and spreading out all of those fun things. Swings and slides and roundabouts are fun. There's no getting away with that, but they don't all have to be in one place with a fence around them. And by the way, in Vauban, this eco suburb that I mentioned, there are pretty much no playgrounds. What they've done is they have done exactly what I've said. They've threaded and woven, you know, slides and swings and slopes and bits of woodland and water courses,
Right.
plazas throughout that neighborhood, so that there's just a very rich diet of play experiences on offer for kids and adults in that suburb.
Yeah, I think like when you talk about choice, that's really important. So everyone in any kind of habitat, people want choice. They want to have some kind of control over their environment where they feel like they're involved in the interpretation of it or the making of it or their sort of personal handprint on it. And I think, I mean, as an architect, I feel that strongly about houses or any space. And that often you kill a space by making it too restrictive where you don't have choice, where you can only use it in one way or the other. So it can
Yeah.
be a kind of test of an environment to say, what kinds of uses or interpretations might this afford? What am I allowing this, what is this sort of a stage set for?
Yeah.
And then then the place becomes animated because life comes in and inhabits it in different ways, different times of day, different, so I think that's really a skill that maybe a lot of designers aren't thinking in terms of.
And I think we need to be honest about the particular problem we got with the playground model, if you like, is that, for 60, 70 years or more, it's become more and more narrowly defined, as a product that you get from a manufacturer with a very rigid sort of form, with fence and surfacing and particular types of kit that's, a million miles away from what would actually be a rich and playful place for kids to explore and discover and test themselves and immerse themselves in. And so that model really needs revamping. And actually, again, in my book, I've got it's towards the very end of the book. What about the future playgrounds? Let's try softening the boundaries, including more natural materials, thinking about different senses, social space, and really moving well away from what I think you call the cookie cutter playground, and we call them KFCs, which stands for kit, fence, and carpet. And it's well past its use by date as a model. I still take a lot of encouragement from the positive signs I see, and definitely within the planning and design world, there's, I think, a real appetite for a fresh vision, for thinking more about health, sustainability, equity. And so children is a very natural and powerful way to, as I say, bring those conversations together. So that is still really motivating for me. And I'm also really proud of the book, and I just want to get it out there.
Yes, I think it's going to make a huge impact. And I see more and more sort of placemakers and advocates coming out of parents. Just the act of being a parent suddenly makes you see the world differently.
Absolutely. So, I say this in the book. You've got a generation of maybe young professionals. They've lived downtown, or, they're immersed in kind of thinking about urban life. Then they become parents, and they don't want to move out into the suburbs like their parents did. They want to stay downtown. They want to have that energy, that creativity, and they know that walkability makes sense, that public space is really important, so that it's a natural way for them. And I see these sort of cohorts, and individual friends and colleagues of mine who've been down, who are going on that journey. I think that's very powerful and motivating and really encouraging, especially when it's wedded, to a moral vision around fairness and health and sustainability. Then things, you can really see amazing things happen.
Great. Well, this has been wonderful. And one last sort of update on the Creek Boys that I sent in the video is that, and it's sort of a testimony to the power of outdoor play and connection with nature, is that they grew up, playing in this creek across from their elementary school and exploring downtown. Even though they were sort of refugees here, they would, climb trees and sling hammocks and go into places that were illegal and buildings under construction and all of that. But because they were allowed that freedom, which also came from their parents, they have all grown up to pursue careers like landscape architecture, urban policy, urban forestry. They're all like avid stewards of their environment, and they care
Right.
about cities and where they live, every one of them. And one even ran for a planning commission, and they're in their early 20s now, but I've seen the impact that kind of freedom of mobility and independence and connection with nature has had on them. And it's a great evidence of that benefit.
At a very basic level, I think we all want to feel like we have some kind of sense of our, that we have some say over our lives and the direction that our lives take, of our everyday autonomy, and that we can bounce back from the challenges that life puts in front of us. And I don't think there's a better way of building, nurturing that muscle, that capacity, than letting kids figure out for themselves, their own interests, what they can do, how far they can go, how to deal with problems. You start that at a young age, and then it stays with kids for life, I think. Almost whatever the direction their life path takes them, they'll have that reservoir of resilience and confidence and belief in themselves.
I've long dreamt of living in a city like the one Tim describes, an urban playground where children in all ages can move, mix, play, and explore freely and loosely, where people aren't segregated into kids play here and old folks live there, where a tapestry of gathering places, community watering holes are woven throughout the city and filled with the diversity of all who live there. Let's heed Tim's call to action. Let's remove the fences and gates. Let's welcome children and families out into the public realm. Let's work together to create cities that invite all of us out to play and fully experience where we live.
Wow, that was so wonderful. Thank you guys so much for creating that compact conversation with images all filled in, and we appreciate that portion. And now I'd like to hand it over to Tina and Tim to go ahead and open up the conversation and share more with the group that's assembled here today.
Yes, thank you all for coming again. And I think in the chat is also the links to where you can get the book. I think it's also available on Amazon, isn't it, Tim? Yeah. Okay. For the US folks. And if there's questions in the chat, we'll be looking for those. And then also, if you want to just raise your hand and ask Tim directly a question, please feel free.
Tina, I'm going to leap in.
Yes,
there was a question
please.
near the beginning. Somebody said, well, what does all this mean in policy terms? And I think that's a good question. And we didn't really cover. By the way, I thought the interview was beautifully edited, so thank you for that.
Sure.
But first thing is, I've learned from visiting cities that you need people and policies. Okay, I know of cities that have wonderful policies. The documents are beautifully written. They're full of admirable sentiments and goals, and maybe even quite specific, measures. But unless there are people in place to implement that policy, it will go awry, where it just won't get done, because this stuff is hard. This is not an easy, pushing back on the culture of the car, on the culture of, of anxiety and of flight from public space is a hard thing to do. So, but you do also need the policies, because you need that institutional embeddedness. Somebody can point to a document and say, look, you say you're going to do this, so you should be doing it. And there are 4 building blocks that I talk about in terms of policy in the book. And the first one is streets. So it's actually focusing on how to make streets more sociable and walkable and enjoyable places. The second is walking and cycling networks. So actually complete connected grids that allow people of all ages, of course, crucially children, to get around neighborhoods. The third is public space. We did talk quite a lot about public space, and I think people will be fairly clear about my messages there. And the fourth is really around housing and the kind of built fabric of neighborhoods, and the relationship between buildings and the spaces around them. Density comes in there, and you know, in a nutshell, I try and argue for a sort of, you know, a compactness, the sort of stuff that urbanists are talking about, gentle density, density done well, and those 4 building blocks are the areas where policy needs to focus. And if you can get good policies and the people in place to develop them and see them through, have the partnerships with different municipal departments and with community organizations and you know, groups of residents, then you've got a really powerful plan for making an area more playful and child friendly.
Right, and you also talk about, you know, this champion that is essential generally that you've seen, and but it doesn't necessarily have to be a employee of the city government, right? Could be a citizen activist, or I was wondering if you could say more about how that person plays a role.
Okay, I mean, this might vary in different countries and you know, where there are different local governments, but for the most part, I do feel this is an issue where you need the municipality to run with it. If you don't have that commitment and impetus from the local municipality, then you're really hidebound. You only get so far. The catalyst could be, you know, citizen activists, or often is, or an NGO. There may be a partnership with an NGO. There are several cities that I looked at. Boulder is a good example. People will maybe know the work of Boulder, Colorado, you know, where the NGO Growing Up Boulder is really central to the work that city is doing on becoming more child friendly. But the municipality is there as well, both supporting the NGO, but also working with the NGO to make a difference. And I think, you know, those of us who live in democracies, they sometimes drive us mad, but, you know, local democracy, I think part of what local democracy means is there is an institution that kind of holds the ring for how that community or city is going, where it's going, what shape it's going to be. And so, you know, I make no apology for saying I think the municipality is crucial to all of this. Doesn't mean to say they're the be all and end all, but I think without them, we're going to be, you know, fiddling around the edges.
Right. Well, we've got a question here from Julia Morlacci. Would you like to say it? Is Julie there? Can you turn on your camera? And
hi. You said it correctly. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. My question for you, Tim, is I was just curious as to know how many of the play spaces or redesigned play spaces you studied were designed with children and or with youth, not just with adults. And if they were designed with children or youth, what were their methodologies or any of that you're aware of? Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So I have quite a long section in the book. One of my principles, there are 9 principles, and one of them is involve children effectively. And that children and young people, and I chose those words carefully. There's been a lot of work around children's participation. I think Tina's probably aware of it. Others on this call will be. There are occasional examples of great projects where children have had a real say and had an influence. There are huge numbers of examples of where children have, you know, fed their ideas in or come up with drawings or wish lists and they've been ignored. There are even more examples of where children's wishes and views and concerns have been ignored altogether. They haven't even been asked. So I think participation is important. And I say something in my books, particularly about the value of capturing children's lived experience, understanding what it's like for a child in that neighborhood or in that city or you know, using as a user of that public space that might be being improved. What's there? What insights can they offer? But that's different from asking them to design and come up with a solution. And I'm worried that we can't expect children to come up with all of the design solutions. I think that's a job for skilled and informed adults working with children. And again, you know, all of my experience of great playful public spaces, sometimes children haven't been involved. Often they have been, especially with older children. It's really important to involve teenagers. Teenagers have a lot to say and lots of insights. But it's the presence of, you know, experienced adults who have insights and knowledge and the experience of working to create great places. It's those people, those adults who often are the key, working with children. And just to repeat, I don't think we can rely on children and young people to come up with the solutions. I'll say just one more thing about participation as well. And it goes to some of the points I was making in our interview, Tina. And it's bringing children's voices into a debate can be a really powerful way to get the adults to think harder about how things need to change. And especially about thinking about, you know, health and the climate and the kind of longer term. And actually Boulder is a good example. One of the projects in Boulder was a downtown project. And the municipality said that one of the best things about involving youth in that downtown project was that it helped to manage and frankly sort of dilute, reduce the influence of some of the adult vested interests who were trying to get their own way in that public space. So the voice and the participation of children helped to build a more equitable and kind of a project that met the public good, not just the good of some narrow sectional interests.
Yes, and just to plug Dinah Bornat here as well. She's got all this great work that she's done in participation.
Yeah. Dinah is a real champion of this here in the UK, and particularly she's done some great work in London, but she's also produced some reports that have far wider relevance. I talked about one of them in our interview, Tina, but yeah, she's developed a youth engagement toolkit that people can find. So that's done. Maybe see if I can find it. Find the link online. It came out just after my book went to print.
Is it the Voice Opportunity Power Toolkit?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll type that in. But I think you make a really good point about not saying children will actually do the designing, but that we need to pay attention to them and listen to them, and really understand their lived experiences of their city. So I think that's an important distinction to make. And she's done some great work in that area. There's a question here about safety. Coming from
Mahar.
Mahar, would you like to ask your question? No? Okay.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you could hear me.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for this great work, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, because I have personally lived in different cities and I could see the difference between cultures and security that there is in that city. So I'm wondering how you approach that subject. In some communities, parents don't want their children to go out or play because it's not safe for them, or they learn things that parents don't want them to. So how do you approach this?
So I think it's a really good question. It reminds us that design can only do so much. You know, in my book, I talk about a sort of pyramid of play. So if we want children to be able to play freely out of doors, you can imagine a pyramid of things that need to be in place. So children need space to play, of course. they need time to play. So, an extended period of time. They also need supportive adult attitudes, right? So that's the third bit of this pyramid. And so the adults, will allow or perhaps facilitate and keep an eye on children. And then the fourth bit of the pyramid I just wanted to include is actually children need other children as well. You can have all the space, time, and supportive attitudes in the world, but if you're the only child in that space, then you're not going to stick around very long. So other children is important. Now, your question about safety and security, sometimes it is enough, I think, to just make spaces work better through design. That you can turn spaces around by improving connections, by making more offers in the space, and just enticing more people in. And again, as Jan Gehl, often the Danish designer, reminds us, people go where people are, and so you can create a sense of social safety simply by drawing more people in. But sometimes that may not be enough, and so you might need to have programming, you might need to have security measures, you might need to have some kind of restricted access or official oversight. But I think we should try whatever it takes to make public spaces work better. And there are quite a number of examples. There's one example from Recife. So I visited some favelas in Recife, which is one of the, it's a big city in Brazil. Even by Brazilian standards, it's not a safe city. There's very high levels of inequality and income inequality. But there was a favela improvement program that was running. It wasn't particularly expensive or elaborate. It was about improving pathways, brightening up the facades, the building frontages, and finding little pockets of public space. But what they found was that neighborhoods where this program had run were neighborhoods where, before the program, parents just did not want their children to play out. They were too frightened. But after the improvements, there was a complete transformation. And they measured this. They could show huge increases in the percentages of children playing out and of changes in the parental attitudes. So I'm not giving up on the idea, even in places that might seem quite tough, because actually I think all parents want their kids to be able to play out. They're just worried about what might happen to them. So if you can address those fears, and sometimes they're based on reality, and sometimes they're just based on a history or a cultural norm, a cultural set of values that could change.
And here's a question from Carmen. Carmen Mays, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, you want to ask your question?
Yes. So, hi, I'm Carmen Mays. I am located in Birmingham, Alabama. And one of my concerns is about the criminalization and adultification of particularly Black and Brown children and other ethnic minorities in public space. Birmingham is where we're now for how we treated children in public space in the 60s. So I'm wondering, have you seen this in design or policy that is confronting people's biases about which children are actually children and which children are allowed to recreate as they please in open space?
Sure. I do talk about this issue in the book, and in fact, I was writing some of the draft, during the period when the Black Lives Matter movement, was really gaining steam around the world, and I went back and revisited some of those sections, because it is clear that people from different races and different ethnic backgrounds have very different experiences of public space here in the UK and in the US and elsewhere. I think, my own view is that firstly, as a white person, I need to listen. I need to listen more to the experiences of people of color, and I need to pay attention to the insights that people of color who are working in my field have. And I think that's still, we're still at a fairly early stage in that process, because certainly here in the UK, the vast majority of people who are working as planners and as urban designers and transport planners, are white people. And that's changing, but it's not changing fast enough. I also, again, a little bit like the earlier point, I'm ultimately a believer. I have a kind of universal set of values. I believe all children deserve the chance to play and get around their neighborhoods. But that what needs to change for that to happen is going to be different in different contexts. And so, there's a journey that I think we're all having to go on with that. And my feeling here in the UK, at least, is that we're still fairly early on in that journey. And there's a lot of listening and a lot of, being prepared to hear about some of those barriers. Some of which are not really to do with design, of course. They're to do with oversight. They're to do with the attitudes of the police and of official bodies, and of those people who are in charge of the kind of safety and the running of public space. And we see those problems here in the UK as well as in the US.
I was wondering, hey, is Josh Kroom out there? Josh? Anyway, I thought he might chime in.
I'm here.
Do you have any comments on this? Josh is one of the Creek boys and a friend. And do you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I'm at work as I'm listening to this, and it has been really great hearing some of your ideas and some of your focuses. But like Carmen, I had similar questions as well, because I'm coming from Boston. Well, I'm from North Carolina, but I'm living in Boston right now, and I worked at a public school in Dorchester, if anyone's familiar with it. And so many of the students that I worked with are just locked away because they don't have the luxury of being able just to go and hang out in common spaces or spaces that aren't being utilized, just because there is this constant policing and vigilance by different entities, whether it be the police, whether it be private security, etc. And I often reflect on how beneficial it was to be young and to be being able to grow up in a city like Raleigh that allowed me to be able to explore endlessly. But that isn't the reality for a lot of kids in different cities, especially larger cities, growing cities. They don't have that, that ability. So, and I think, especially when you add in that the component of color and race and socioeconomic background, like Carmen was mentioning in Birmingham, it's the same thing here in Boston. And when I hear you talk about this, it sounds very idyllic. Man, that sounds really good. Oh man, I want to, but the reality is it's not the case for everyone. So I know you and other planners mentioned the importance of advocacy and listening, but what are some of the other ways that you try to mitigate some of these factors that keep kids, particularly of color, Black, brown, etc., from being able to enjoy common space and being able to enjoy being outside, just getting fresh air, walking?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is to appeal to that universal argument that I try strongly to make the case in the book that part and parcel of a good childhood, a good enough childhood, is that children do grow up with some space and time where they have that freedom. And that's because all children are losing out on that. Again, I made the point in the interview, Tina, and here in the UK, for example, there are plenty of schools now where kids are not allowed out of school at lunchtimes. That's against the rules. Didn't used to be the case 20 or 40 years ago, certainly not when I was growing up. There are some schools now where when a child leaves a school, if they're wearing a school uniform, so we have school uniforms, with identifiable jumpers, clothing that people know where you're from, which school you're from, you have to go straight home and change before you can go out and be seen in public space. Okay, so there's a general increased restriction on children's freedoms, and then which has grown in the last 2 or 3 decades. Then on top of that, you've got a kind of racist and other forces that amplify those restrictions for Black and minority ethnic children or girls compared to boys. But I see my main role as making that basic case for what a good childhood looks and feels like, and then, you know, learning and listening and getting to grips with what that might mean for children in different contexts and backgrounds. So in London, I think one of the things that means is, you know, that Black and brown boys in London have, and some other big cities in the UK, have real, face real barriers from almost every direction. You know, their own parents, the police, the other people who are involved, and you know, the community, and that has to be challenged. And one of the ways of doing that is to engage with those groups of people, you know, to engage with those groups of young people, and actually bring their voices and their views into the discussion about when a neighborhood or a housing estate is being improved.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, you experienced that as a teenager too, sort of being threatening. I mean, just teenage boys are not well accepted in public space often, but then, you know, being a person of color on top of that, it doubles, you know, it's sort of a double whammy. Yeah.
Right, and there is a definite, again, quite a widespread cultural fear of teenagers that, you know, I even see it in, you know, in Denmark, where, you know, which is a country that some of us hold, you know, believe is a very, you know, egalitarian and a country that's very child friendly. So these are not new problems. They're not always that different in different countries. Jane Jacobs, I think, has some terrific things to say about teenagers in The Death and Life of Great American Cities, if you go back and look at chapter 4 of that book. So, you know, sometimes you just have to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in and keep on making the case. And Dinah, I can hear Dinah Bornat's voice in my ear about how, you know, all the work that she's done with young people, it shows the energy and the positivity and the creativity that they can bring to conversations about making places work better. And we're beginning to see that recognized. In my launch event a couple of weeks ago, we had a developer. So we had a guy who works with one of the big developers in London. It's called Grosvenor. They're really big. They do a lot of, you know, high-end developments. And he's just set up a youth panel that is giving young people a direct voice in what's going on in some of these developments that are coming on in London. And it's early days, but I think those mechanisms will make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like anything, communication, just listening, sitting down, giving time and attention to these kids and having them have a voice. It's just something that makes all the difference. We've see what else we've got here. Helen Taylor, are you there? She was asking about schoolyards. Is that right? I think you're mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi there. Hi, Tim. And yeah, I was interested. I did a book that came out last year about urban schools, and we included a chapter about dispersing education across the city. And one of the challenges we really had at the time was trying to find good examples of that actually happening in practice. There's a lot of really positive talk around it, and I just wondered, Tim, in your experience, if you'd come across any great examples of schools actually driving positive change in the area that you're talking about, in terms of actually just, you know, simple things like opening their gates out of hours, or helping drive improvements in their local environments in terms of child-friendly streets.
In my book, what I say about schoolyards, and generally my approach to schoolyards, is I believe schoolyards should be public. They should be open. You know, it's a complete waste of a resource for schoolyards to be closed and for kids to not be able to get to them. and you'll know, Helen, in the UK, that's the norm. In the US, it's different. I think in the US, most schools are open, schoolyards are open. They may not be that great, but they are at least open out of school hours. So there's a basic policy argument that we need to make. And those of us who live in countries where schoolyards are locked and gated, and I could point to what's happening in the Netherlands, where for the most part schoolyards are open. I would say, Paris is a good example. So Paris is running a kind of schoolyard program that's greening schoolyards and opening them up for public use as a response to the climate crisis and to the kind of heat island effect. So that's an interesting example of one of the points that I make in the book, which is that this agenda is a modest, it's peripheral at the moment, right? We're starting from a low base. So one of the things that advocates have to do is we have to be opportunistic. We have to look at ways that we can hitch our goals and objectives to wider objectives, whether those are around the economy and the demographics of the city, or around sustainability, or around health and children's rights. When it comes to schoolyards, I think that the school board / municipality is key. I didn't see many examples of schools that just straight off their own bat said, you know what, we as a school want to open our gates and bring kids in. Much more common was that the municipality or the school board said, we think this is a priority. We know there are some tricky issues. There are issues around maintenance. There are issues around insurance. There are issues around security. We're going to work together. We're going to crack them and come up with a solution. And actually, Vancouver is a good example of a city that, particularly in the more dense downtown parts of Vancouver, where there's a strategic drive to keep families living downtown. And that means schools, of course. And then it means that schoolyards in these dense areas, it's recognized that they have to do two jobs. They're there for the kids in the school, and they're there for the immediate neighborhood as a resource. And that's baked into the design of and so when a new school is built, they make sure they get that right. And I saw an example of that in downtown Vancouver. But it shouldn't be that difficult, but seems to be difficult, because I just think there isn't yet the political imperative in most cities that keep schoolyards locked to open them up. So yeah, that's a big task, I think.
Thanks, Tim.
Tina, you're muted.
Sorry, I just realized that. That's something I've been waiting for and pushing for here for years, it seems, because we have a lack of public space, and yet we have 7 acres at the public elementary school down the street. So, but we're not supposed to be going there at all after hours. So I think that's another public space resource that could be tapped in so many cities. It's much needed. Okay. Other questions? Do we have? I was curious if Ohud is still here. Ohud Kamai? No.
Tina, I just seen. Sorry, I don't want to. If she is here, or he or she. Sorry, but I've just seen some interesting questions about sort of litigation and liability.
Sure.
I don't know
please.
if you want to touch on those.
Yes, please.
Someone called it the L word. Now, I think you'll know, Tina, this is a particular focus of my work for 20 years or more now, is tackling risk aversion, fear of litigation, and there is no denying that you have a big problem with that in the US. You can just look at the, I wrote a report for the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. It's called Playing It Safe. I'll see if I can find it and share it in the chat. But it found actual data on litigation rates in different countries, and the US is about 4 times as high levels of litigation as the European average. So that is a big challenge. Having said that, the basic legal framework in the US is not so different from everywhere else, which is that people have a duty of care to take reasonable steps. And that word reasonable is really important. It doesn't mean you can give a cast iron guarantee that no child will ever get injured or hurt. It means you have to kind of take a balanced approach. And certainly there are some great play spaces in the US, public play areas. Teardrop Park is perhaps a really good example. You can Google it. It's in Manhattan. Obviously, cost a ton of money, very high profile, but it's there. It's amazing. And it was executed. It was carried out. And so one of the messages of my book is you need to have a conversation about risk and safety. And we need to recognize there is no such thing as absolute safety. No playground can have a guarantee that no child will ever get injured in it. Life isn't like that. What you need to do is take reasonable steps. And also in the book, I fly the flag for an approach called risk-benefit assessment, which is a way of explicitly weighing up risks and benefits and recognizing, to quote Helle Nebelong, the great Danish landscape architect who's a friend of mine, that you can make playgrounds too safe. If you make a playground so that a child never has to think about where they put their feet when they're climbing up and down a ladder, then that child is not going to pay so much attention, and they're not going to learn how to look after themselves in the more complex environments which they'll find themselves in when they leave the playground. So there are conversations happening about liability and risk and a balanced approach all around the world. In Australia, which is also quite litigious, the playground safety standards, so the industry standards for playgrounds equipment in Australia now incorporate risk-benefit assessment as a tool. So if it can happen in Australia, I see no reason why it can't happen in America. And actually, Megan Talarowski, who I think you might know, Tina, she runs a not-for-profit called Studio Ludo. She's a real champion of creative play design and a talented researcher and designer. She has used risk-benefit assessment in an American schoolyard to justify the inclusion of a non-standard, a non-compliant piece of equipment in a schoolyard that she designed. Okay, so that should be a real encouragement to others who are trying to crack this problem of liability.
Yes, it's a huge challenge. And sometimes in the effort to make something safe, we make it more unsafe by sort of isolating it and fencing it off. It's right. When spaces are more connected and overseen that they become safer. Yeah. Let's see.
By the way, I can't give details, but I'm just heard today about a project that's going to be a schoolyard project in America that I hope to have an involvement in, and if it comes off, it will be very high profile, and it will really tackle head on some of these questions about safety and liability. I haven't checked with the stakeholders yet about whether we can go public on it, but as soon as I can, I'll be sharing news about that on social media, and it could be really exciting. Sorry, I can't say any more at this point, but it shouldn't be too long. And this is a public schoolyard.
That's exciting. What is the title of your book about fear?
Yes, so it's No Fear, Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society. And I should also really share that, shouldn't I? Yes. So I have a dedicated page on my website. So that book came out, 13, 14 years ago now. But you can download the whole book as a PDF for free from my website.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Ryan's just shared the direct link. Okay. So, yeah.
Awesome. Were there other questions you saw, Tim? That you
I slightly gone off at a tangent because I also thought I better just share the link to my current book again as well, just in case people want to find it in the chat. So here it is again. that's a link to a page on my website that just introduces the book, gives an overview, and has links to where you can order it. I am told that the Amazon US is out of stock.
Oh.
So you might want to try one or two of the other links that are on that page that I just circulated.
Okay. So I'll ask Ahood one more time if she's there. She had an interesting experience to share if she's here. Ahood Kamai, is she still with us?
I think they left, Tina.
They left? Okay, sorry. Okay.
But I saw we do have Ethan Kent here, and I was wondering if Ethan has any perspectives from all the placemaking networks around the world, if there's some kid-friendly stuff that comes to mind that ties into this.
And just as an introduction, you know, Ethan is heading up Placemaking X, and and Tim has just been speaking about how the children's lens brings so many people together in talking about cities. Now can be this sort of healing common ground where we can share goals and think collectively more easily when we talk in terms of children in the future. So I think could be a really useful way to approach some of the thorny issues that come up in the placemaking world.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, hi Tim, hi everyone. This is what a great conversation, and congrats on the book launch and lots of interest. And you know, I think as this conversation reflects the real coming together of many people's interests and tapping into something that's so important to all of us. And certainly, you know, it's something I've watched for decades. You know, finally is getting attention. The sort of more, you know, child-centered, you know, sort of integrated play with public spaces, and how do we make cities more playful? How do we make the process of shaping cities more playful and child-friendly and childlike and youthful and all that for everybody? But we're with Placemaking X, you know, the sort of the model, just like with placemaking, is to sort of allow the ideas, the leadership, the case studies, you know, the wisdom to sort of bubble up. And we've spent our first year sort of starting these 15 regional placemaking networks, and Placemaking US is one of them. But the goal now is actually to start to look at what are the biggest cross-cutting issues that are bubbling up amongst them, and the sort of collaborations amongst them. And Tina and Ryan have been involved in a couple of them and really leading them, you know, collaborating with other parts of the world, with Japan and Asia and Europe and so forth. But we've long seen child-friendly placemaking as sort of, you know, one of the top sort of efforts where people are doing things around this, but often alone or a little bit disconnected. And there's foundations that are involved in this obviously now, but also a little bit disconnected from each other. So Placemaking X, we're just looking to sort of help, you know, highlight, facilitate, connect the dots, you know, fill in some roles where you all see is needed, you know, build on this conversation perhaps, have other events, you know, go after grants to do resources or develop resources or something together. But there is sort of a Google Doc, a long list of some of the people that have already interested, and sort of there's some ideas of having some planning of what you know, where does the children in placemaking conversation sort of movement need to go next? What are the next efforts? So you know, to anyone, if you're interested, you know, get in touch with me, and you know, and also with Tina and Ryan, you know, about how to advance this conversation next, and you know, if there's some specific ways we can help, you know, we're excited to do so.
Sure, you're right. I mean, it's an emerging topic. It's a topic that's, you know, there's a long history, and some of it's honourable, but it's also been quite, you know, I think it's generally recognised that, say, the Child Friendly Cities initiative, so that's the UNICEF initiative, and those sort of very strongly participatory programs haven't had a big impact on the built form of cities. They've done other things. There are some exceptions to that, but as a rule, that's the case. More recently, there's been, I mean, I'm one of my clients is the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, who are running their Urban 95 initiative, which is, you know, inviting us to look at cities from a height of 95 centimeters. So that's, I guess, about, what is that, 30 inches, something like that. No, a bit more than that. Anyway, the height of a 3-year-old. and they were actually one of the sponsors of my research. And then there's you'll probably know the Real Play City Challenge cluster that's coming out of Stipo in the Netherlands. Hannah Wright, who used to be who's an urban planner, who's used to be with Arup.
Right.
So there's a lot going on. I mean, I think part of me thinks we need to let 1,000 flowers bloom. You know, we need to just see, you know, where are these levels of energy and effectiveness bubbling up. I do think Bernard Van Leer Foundation are going to continue to be really important, and I really valued not only their support but also the policy lens, the lens about going to scale. They are very focused on, you know, scaling up in interventions and you know, piloting and evaluating and getting good data, and I think that is crucial. And I think that before too long, we probably will need some kind of slightly more structured focus, whether it's a new NGO or whether it's an existing NGO that says, okay, we're going to actually throw a bit of money here to build a network, to give people space and time to really get support from each other, to learn, you know, to share lessons, not just rely on the existing resources, or, you know, somebody like me coming along and writing a book, but actually kind of ramping things up a bit. I do think that is going to be needed, and it may well be that the kind of placemaking model is one that could be a home for that, or could be an inspiration for that.
Yeah,
You're welcome to join us and lead that effort. I mean, I agree. Sorry to interrupt, but I just because I saw you literally, I think it was 20 years ago. And
no, I think it might not have been quite that long. I think it might have been 2009. If it's the trip I'm thinking of.
Okay.
I think it might. So a mere 12 years ago.
Really? Okay. Well, anyway. Maybe
yeah,
it was a growing in place conference, but but I feel like I've been, you know, yearning for these changes and for so long, and it's you get impatient after a while. So
yes. Tell me about it. I mean, even though I last came to the US in 2009, but I first started working in this field in 1994, right? And I went freelance in 2004.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is, you know,
it's a long haul.
You have to take a long view.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. Sorry, Ethan, if you had anything else. Okay.
I did see, I don't know how much more time we've got, Tina. There was just an interesting question, a design question, but I think it was, where are we? Somebody was asking about technology. Have I seen some good examples of the use of technology incorporated into play spaces? So this is Raphael Pasquale Leone.
Oh yeah.
The short answer to this, Raphael, the short answer to this is no.
Oh.
I mean, I'm welcome. You know, I'd be very happy to be disproved. But every time I've seen attempts to introduce, you know, technology, whether it's kind of button interaction or QR codes or little, you know, console bits in playgrounds, they either break really quickly, or they just aren't very much fun after a while. The kids get bored with them, or they just, you know, they kind of rapidly become obsolete because the technology has moved on. So I am a bit of a skeptic on that, and I'm also, you know, I am a fan of a more kind of naturalistic and a more non-prescriptive, you know, kind of creative approach to play space. And I also think that I'm not anti-technology, but actually I think in the real interest is going to be how children and young people just use the technology they already have in more creative ways, whether that is just, you know, filming themselves and sharing it on TikTok or whatever, rather than, you know, trying to sort of hardwire a technology that's going to be, you know, maybe a bit flaky or maybe go out of date quite quickly.
Well, wasn't there some technology used in Oslo around transportation or how kids got around.
That's different, right? That was
Okay.
about that. You're absolutely right. That's a nice project. It was using an app, a mobile phone app, to allow children to give their views to the municipality about how they get around. So it wasn't a play space related bit of technology. It was really using technology to give children a voice,
Right.
which is different and I think has much more potential. It was a lovely
Okay.
project. It's one of the projects that I wrote up in the book.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's finished now. It was called Traffic Agent,
Okay.
and it was really impressive.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think, are we at the end of our session here, Ryan? Any last words you would like to give? I think the book
Yes.
is amazing, and
Well,
go ahead, Ryan.
we would just like to thank you and thank Tim for participating today and bringing us this amazing chat, and also to let people know that we have more Placemaking US webinars coming up this week, including one with you and I in Placemaking Japan on Friday, talking about Japanese placemaking. And then also on Friday, we're starting our 2021 climate change cohort with the Placemaking Earth Challenge, with people from around the world working to co-design with nature, which really could apply to kid-friendly approaches. So we hope you guys will be able to join us this Friday for one of those, or more activities and events in the future around kid-friendly cities, climate change, placemaking, and all of the above.
Yes, thank everyone for coming. And this is just the beginning of the Child Friendly Cities initiative with us here at Placemaking US. So I would love Tim to contribute in the future and be part of it.
Be very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Tim. And
Thanks, everyone.
a recording will be posted, right, Ryan, on our Facebook page.
Yes, and we'll send everybody the links as well.